Okay, now we're going to be talking about various sources of influence. You have implicit influence, informational influence, normative influence, and interpersonal influence. And a little bit later we'll talk about the bystander effect, where influence actually inhibits you in a certain way. Let's talk about implicit. Implicit means it's kind of below your conscious awareness. It's not deliberate. It's kind of just automatic. And in many ways, we are influenced by others, kind of automatically, without any conscious control. We tend to mimic each other. If we're having a conversation and the person in front of us is nodding, we might nod as well. If they're making a lot of hand gestures, we may make a lot of hand gestures, and we often do this not deliberately, but kind of unconsciously. Ellen Langer did a very interesting study looking at this mindlessness, in which we kind of just are influenced by other people. And she set up, if you read, you can read about it in the textbook. She talks about, she set up a circumstance where, somebody's using a copy machine, and the person who is, just working for the experimenter would go into the copy machine and ask to use the copy machine. And in one case, gives an excuse, gives no excuse. Just says, "Can I use the copy machine?" While the real person there is using it. And in another case, they give an excuse. "Can I use the copy machine? I'm really in a rush." And in a third case, "Can I use the copy machine because I need to make some copies?" And that is not really a reason, a valid excuse for stopping for cutting in front of someone in line, but nevertheless, what she found was very interesting. Without any kind of excuse, only about 60% complied with the request and let the person use the copy machine. Little over 90%. When the person said, "I need to make some copies, I'm in a rush," let her use the copy machine. But interestingly enough, when the excuse was just, "I need to make some copies," still, over 90% agreed to let her use the copy machine, which is very interesting because, again, it's an indication of just a mindless, "Oh, okay," just needing to hear something, some kind of excuse. Even if the excuse is nonsense, it's okay. However, if it was a large request, so if it was 20 copies rather than 5 copies, then there was going to be less compliance, because that's just a bit too big of a request. And when somebody is really imposed upon, and when someone is really trying to influence you in a way that you don't want to go, that's when you'll kind of wake up from your mindlessness and just say, "All right, no, that's okay. Let me finish what I'm doing, please." So, for the most part, these little, mind doing this, would you mind doing that, kind of influence, we are very susceptible to that, and we can respond to these mindless requests. Now, why might this be interesting, and why might this be important? Is that think about how salespeople are effective at persuading us to do things. They might make mindless little requests for us, and we'll just accept those requests. Even something as simple as asking when you get a sales call and they ask you kind of a simple question, how's the weather in Baton Rouge today, or something like that. You might just mindlessly answer the question, but what that does is now it sets up a conversation in which the salesperson now perhaps be willing to perhaps buy their product or something like that. So realize that being susceptible to this mindlessness of influence means that we could then be susceptible to further little steps as one step leading to another. Kind of like it's called the foot in the door phenomenon. You agree to one little thing, and then you might, you might agree to something a little bit bigger. Another important way in which we are influenced is informational influence. When we are in a group situation and we are perhaps confused about what to do, confused about what decision we need to make, oftentimes we will rely on the people around us, what the rest of the group is doing, to kind of make a decision. If you are not really sure what to do, look around and see what everybody else is doing, and it might give you some information about what you need to do. So, for example, going back to social comparison theory, we see what other people are doing, and we make a comparison between our response and their response, and we kind of use that information to make a decision there. So, we compare ourselves with others, and we base our decisions that way. Sometimes, however, we might have a false consensus. The false consensus effect means that we believe something and we think that other people also have that same belief. And it might lead us to us just assume other people in the group are feeling the same way and are doing this for a particular reason, and we may just kind of follow along just because of that belief in that false consensus. Finally, another important thing to consider is that in some cases we are looking for information to make a decision, to decide how to act, what to do in a particular group situation. And this might be done consciously, rationally. Okay, say, all right, what's happening here? Why are they doing this? All right, that makes sense. I guess I'll do it too. And that's kind of a thoughtful, deliberate process. But other times we might, follow along with what the group is doing, just because of kind of like what are called, heuristics, cognitive shortcuts, emotional responses, and we don't really think about why we're following along, but we kind of do it just as more like mental shortcuts, not really thinking about why we're following along and why we're being influenced, but we just kind of do it. And again, it's kind of automatic, but again, we're using those mental shortcuts in order to make that decision. Okay. Now, another form of influence is normative influence, and this is when we're essentially responding to the group because of the social standards that the group is essentially enforcing, and we are going along with what the group is doing because we feel the pressure of following along. It's not like with informational influence where we might have a question about why the group is doing this. Let's investigate. Okay, let's do it. With normative influence, we see what the group is doing. The group is, in a way, is pushing us to follow along. So there's that there's a stronger sense, a stronger pressure to follow with this normative influence. When you disagree with others, and you're in a group of people, and everybody says one thing, but you're believing something else, we have a sense of cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the idea that when you have two thoughts, or your thoughts and your actions that are different from each other. So, like, if you think of yourself as an honest person, but then you're seeing yourself steal something, there's cognitive dissonance there. I'm acting one way, but thinking of myself in another way. And when you have that sense of cognitive dissonance, it creates an unpleasant state, physiological state, that you're motivated to reduce. So you want to find some way to remove that dissonance. So, for example, if you see yourself as an honest person and you see yourself also stealing something, you may have to rethink that behavior. You either don't steal, or you might say, well, it was only a small thing, or you say, well, the guy wasn't careful anyway, so he deserves to get the thing stolen. So as long as you find a way to reduce that dissonance, still see yourself as an honest person, even though you're stealing something, you reduce that dissonance, then you feel better. Well, in a group situation, if the group is doing one thing, maybe doing something that you believe is immoral, and you're part of this group, and you're about to partake in this activity, you have a sense of cognitive dissonance. Okay? And, the group is doing something immoral, and I'm feeling pressure to do this too. I'm feeling a sense, but I don't feel it's right. Well, you can either leave the group, or you can follow along with what the group is doing, and just say, well, if everybody else is doing it, I guess it's okay. And you can reduce that sense of dissonance. But it's that pressure that you have to deal with, to make you do that. And this reflects the focus theory of normative influence. Is that normative influence is a stronger form of influence than informational influence. The normative influence is really like a pressure to follow along. Informational influence is more or less part of the searching process, part of the questioning process about, well, what do I do now? Okay, now we're going to talk about interpersonal influence. And interpersonal influence is kind of like more direct. See, with normative influence, you kind of see how everybody is acting, and you feel a sense of pressure to kind of go along with what the group is doing. So the normative influence represents norms. It represents kind of the unwritten rules of the group that you feel pressure to follow. Interpersonal influence is more direct. If you are dissenting, if you are going against the group, members of the group will try to pressure you, directly pressure you to try to get you on the path towards consensus, to get you to agree. You think about this in a jury situation for sure. If you're the lone dissenter, the rest of the jury, they want to get the case tied up, and they're going to, try to pressure you to do it. Maybe they'll yell at you. Maybe they will try to reward you for going the rest of the way. Hey, come on, let's get out of here early. I'll take you to lunch if you agree, that kind of thing. So this is a lot more direct. And basically, being rejected by a group is very unpleasant. Again, early on, we talked about how being excluded, being ostracized, is actually, activates the part of the brain that's related to feeling physical pain. So it's painful to be excluded. And if you are somebody who's going to deviate from the group and do it over and over again, well, the group is going to try to push you away and to try to reject you. And you're not going to be liked. It's going to be unpleasant. Okay. And eventually, if you keep, going against the group, eventually the groups are going to not bother with you anymore and ignore you. So this is where the interpersonal influence comes into play. You might want to just go ahead and agree with the group if they're pressuring you, and it'll make them like you more. So you might just go along with the group just to be liked, and that's where interpersonal influence is. Okay, so again, at some point, they'll try to pressure you. They'll try to, because there's someone who's deviating. They're going to try to pressure the deviant. After a while, they're going to try to keep pushing, until eventually maybe the deviant is just excluded. Okay, we give up. We're not going to bother with you anymore. interestingly enough, a group member who violates a norm, but is someone who is a member of the group versus like an out-group member, when you are an in-group member, when you're part of the group, and you violate a group norm, you are going to be evaluated very negatively, much more so than someone who's outside the group who does the same thing. And again, this is called the black sheep effect. When you are a member of the group but you violate the norm, it's kind of a special sense of negative feelings. If you're part of the outgroup and you violate the norm, that's that's just the outgroup, so they're not gonna. That's expected. But you're part of our group. You should know better. That kind of thing is kind of the black sheep effect. However, there might be times in which you are willing to deal with these costs if you feel that the outcome, the decision that the group has to make is very, very important. So there are times in which you're really identifying with the group and you really want the group to be successful and you really want a good decision to be made, that you're willing to bear those costs. If you're dissenting, if you feel it's important to them. So those are times where you can do that. Okay, now let's talk about the bystander effect, and this is where the influence of others can actually prevent you from acting. And this is again the bystander. The Kitty Genovese tragedy is cited very often, and this is where a young woman named Kitty Genovese was stalked and repeatedly attacked by this guy Winston Moseley. Raped her and stabbed her several times. Somebody yelled out from the window to leave her alone. He left, then came back and finished the job. And it took, the attack took like, a long time before she was finally killed. And she was, this was a very big tragedy. And I kind of got the idea that, people in New York, because this happened in New York, people in New York are so mean and cruel that they're just going to let this woman die because they just don't want to get involved. It's not quite as simple as, the people of New York not caring about this poor girl. It's about the effect that having other people around, having other people who could potentially respond, actually makes you less likely to respond. And this is not just in New York, this is just anywhere. If you are in a group, you're much less likely to provide assistance, to help, than when you're alone. Okay? So, what caused, for example, maybe it took a while for somebody to call the police and finally, get this thing in. Why did people, refuse to? Why did people not help? Okay, well, one aspect is you get informational influence. You're looking around and seeing what everybody else is doing. If nobody else is helping, you may just assume, well, I guess there isn't any kind of emergency after all. So the information you're getting is, I guess, I don't need to help. Maybe they hear a lot of screams in the neighborhood all day, and maybe just seeing other people not doing anything, I guess it's all right to not do anything. There's also normative influence. Maybe you might be in a culture where the norm is, don't mind your own business, stay out of other people's business. And if that's a norm that you follow, then you're going to be hesitant to get involved in somebody else's dispute. Okay? On the other hand, you might be in a culture where it is normal to be helpful to others. And this is something that everybody does, and that's what everybody's expected to do. Now, in those cultures, then you're going to be more likely to help. But in a culture of mind your own business, then you're probably going to be less likely to help. Finally, the concept of diffusion of responsibility. If you are alone, if you are with one other person, and that was it, and it was just the two of you, and that person, falls down and faints, you're not going to ignore that person. You're going to help that person because you're the only one there who can help. You are completely 100% responsible for what happens to this person. If, however, you're in a large classroom and someone falls off the chair and faints, you're probably not going to walk across from the other side of the room to help this person. Everybody else is sitting there. There will be other people there, maybe people sitting next door that might be able to help better than you can. And so the responsibility that you have toward the person who needs help is diffused among all the other people who could be helping. So that's called diffusion of responsibility. You're going to be less likely to help when there are a lot of other potential helpers out there. Okay? So diffusion of responsibility, essentially, if you're solely responsible. So in other words, let's say, for example, it was a different circumstance for Kitty Genovese, and that, maybe it happened on an empty street, and you were out in the street, and everybody was empty, but you were out there, and you were there, and you were the only one, you were right there, like, seeing it. So in other words, the guy runs off, and she's lying on the floor bleeding. Of course, you are going to take responsibility. You are right there, and there's nobody else there. Okay? You are the only one who's responsible at that point. If it was a busy street, there were a lot of other people, you'd be less likely to help. And Darley and Latani analyzed, reactions to emergencies. And, for example, they had subjects sitting in a room, taking a test, or filling out a questionnaire or whatever, and smoke starts to enter the room. Well, if the person is alone, smoke starts to enter the room. If the person is alone, they react pretty quickly. Okay. If you are in the group and there are other Confederates there who are not doing anything, you're not going to react either. The smoke comes in and you just sit there, just like everybody else seems to be doing. Even if you are with 3 other subjects who are not involved in the study and don't know what's going on, it still takes a while for you to react. But when you are alone, you react a lot more quickly. Now, again, people might think that if there's more people, there's going to be a greater reaction, but it's not true. The fewer the people, the faster the reaction.